I didn't know this prayer could save a life until it saved mine. I still remember the night I almost gave up on God. I had said the Lord's Prayer more times than I could count, before meals, during church, even half asleep. But that night, when everything in my world was falling apart, I whispered it differently. Our Father who art in heaven. My voice trembled, my faith was cracked, and yet something happened. I didn't feel goosebumps, I didn't see visions, but for the first time I wasn't reciting a ritual. I was crying out like a child who finally realized they had a father listening. That's when I understood. This prayer wasn't meant to be memorized. It was meant to be lived. It was meant to be felt. It was meant to connect heaven to your darkest moment on earth. We must lay before him what is in us, not what ought to be in us. C.S. Lewis. And if you've ever found yourself praying from a place of heartbreak, if you've ever wondered if the words you whisper in the dark really reach God, then this video is for you. Because what if I told you this prayer is more than just words? What if I told you it's a blueprint, a weapon, a spiritual realignment with God himself? In this message, we're going to walk through each line of the Lord's Prayer, line by line, word by word, and uncover the power most believers overlook. By the end, you won't just repeat the prayer. You'll own it. You'll live it. You'll never pray the same way again. This prayer brought me back to life. There was a season when I couldn't pray the Lord's Prayer anymore. Not because I stopped believing in God, but because I started wondering if he had stopped believing in me. I had whispered those sacred words in hospital rooms. I had cried them into pillows when no one else knew the storm inside me. I had repeated them out of habit, but somewhere along the way the meaning faded. And so did my hope. You see, I had asked God for healing, but the pain lingered. I had asked for peace, but anxiety still crept into my chest at 2 a.m. I had asked for clarity, but all I got was silence that felt like abandonment. So eventually I stopped praying it altogether. Until one night, when I had no words left, no fancy phrases, no faith-filled declarations, I found myself muttering just one line, "Give us this day our daily bread," and I realized I wasn't asking for food. I was asking for strength to keep breathing, for courage to get through the next 24 hours, for hope, not for next year or next month, but just for tonight. It was in that fragile, unfiltered moment that everything shifted. The prayer I once recited by rote suddenly became my rescue. We must lay before him what is in us, not what ought to be in us. C.S. Lewis. That line hit me like lightning. God wasn't waiting for polished words. He was waiting for presence, for his child to stop pretending and start returning. This prayer, I realized, was never meant to be a performance. It was meant to be a conversation between a hurting heart and a listening Father. That's when the Lord's Prayer came back to life for me. Not as a ritual, but as a lifeline, a way back into the arms of a God who never stopped waiting. And maybe you're there right now, worn down, disconnected, going through the motions of faith without feeling the fire. If you've ever said the Lord's Prayer just hoping to feel something again, if you've ever asked, "Is God even listening?" then friend, don't click away. This might be your moment. The moment when words you've repeated for years suddenly hit different, because now you're ready to live them. Let's walk this journey together. Let's rediscover the truth Jesus hid in every line. Let's stop reciting the prayer and start experiencing it, because the prayer that once faded into background noise might just be the very thing that brings your soul back to life. Give us this day our daily bread. When I had nothing left but a prayer. I didn't truly understand this line. Give us this day our daily bread, until the day came when I had no bread left. No paycheck, no backup plan, no full fridge. Only an aching silence and 2 small children asleep in the next room, their tiny dreams unaware of the anxiety that kept me awake. I remember standing in my dimly lit kitchen staring at the cold emptiness inside my refrigerator, whispering, God, I'm not asking for a miracle. I'm just asking for enough to make it to tomorrow. That night I prayed the Lord's Prayer, not with eloquence, not with confidence, but with a trembling voice, the kind only desperation can shape. And in that moment, for the first time, the words felt real, like I wasn't saying them to the air, but to a Father who actually listened. The next morning, just after sunrise, I heard a knock on the door. It was my neighbour. We weren't close. We'd only exchanged polite smiles in passing. But she held out a grocery bag and simply said, I don't know why, but I felt like I was supposed to bring this to you. Tears welled up before I could speak. Because in that sacred moment, this prayer was no longer just tradition. It was provision. It was presence. It was proof that even when we whisper, God responds. God has infinite attention. You are as much alone with him as if you were the only being he had ever created. C.S. Lewis, Jesus knew what he was saying when he taught us to ask for daily bread. He wasn't just referring to food. He was pointing to our need for daily dependence, just like the manna in the wilderness that fell fresh every morning, only enough for that day. They couldn't store it. They had to trust him all over again, day by day. And maybe that's exactly what this part of the prayer is inviting us into, not to plan our lives 5 years ahead, not to stockpile peace through control, but to wake up and simply say, Father, I trust you for today, just today. So if you're tired, scared of what's next, drowning in what-ifs, maybe what you need isn't a better plan. Maybe what you need is the prayer itself. Not spoken from ritual, but from surrender, not with certainty, but with faith. Give us this day our daily bread, and you'll find that he does, faithfully, tenderly, one day at a time. Forgive us as we forgive. How I let go of the weight that was crushing me. There was a season when I couldn't say this part of the Lord's Prayer without choking on the words. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Every time I reached that line, something clenched deep inside me, not because I didn't believe in forgiveness, but because I wasn't ready to give it, not to them, not after what they did, not after the betrayal, the silence, the lies, not after the trust they shattered like glass and walked away without looking back. I told myself I was over it. I smiled in public, served at church, even taught about grace. But behind closed doors, I was still carrying it, still waking up angry, still replaying the conversation, still holding on to the wound like it was a part of my identity. And in my prayers, I said all the right things. Lord, I trust you. Lord, I surrender. But I never let him touch that place, the place where pain had hardened into pride. Then one late night, flipping through scripture in a desperate search for peace, I landed in Matthew 18, the parable of the unmerciful servant. You know the story. A servant owed his king a debt so massive it would take lifetimes to repay. He pleaded for mercy and the king forgave him every last coin. But then, newly free, he walked out and grabbed another servant by the throat, someone who owed him just a fraction, and demanded payment. When the king heard what happened, he was furious. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had on you? Matthew 18:33. That's when the realization struck. I was that servant. God had forgiven me completely. Not just for the visible sins, but for the secret ones. Not just for the mistakes I made, but the ones I kept repeating. He had wiped my slate clean, and yet I was still clinging to a wound someone else had inflicted once. Still making them pay in my thoughts, in my silence, in my resentment. That night didn't end with fireworks or a perfect moment of peace. But it did begin with one honest prayer. Father, I don't know how to forgive, but I'm willing to try. That's when healing began. To forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in me. C.S. Lewis, forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It didn't mean letting them back into my life. It meant I no longer had to carry the bitterness that was crushing me. Forgiveness set me free, free from the tightness in my chest, free from rehearsing old arguments, free to breathe, free to pray, and actually mean it. And that's the beauty of the Lord's Prayer. It doesn't ask us to forgive because they deserve it. It asks us to forgive because we have been forgiven more than we'll ever know. If you're still holding on to a name that makes your stomach turn, if your soul tightens at the thought of letting go, you're not alone. But maybe today is your moment to release it. Not for them, for you. Because when you truly say, forgive us as we forgive, you're not just speaking words, you're stepping into freedom. Who is the first person you need to forgive to be whole again? Comment their initials if you're ready to let it go, and watch what God will do with a willing heart. Our Father in heaven. When one word, healed. What a lifetime broke. For most of my life, I could say the words Father God with my lips, but I couldn't believe them in my heart, because how do you trust a father you can't see when the one you could see left you behind? My dad walked out when I was just a kid. No long goodbye, no explanation, just gone. And though I convinced myself it didn't matter, I buried the pain, kept moving, smiled at church. I carried the absence like a silent weight. So every time I prayed, Our Father, it felt foreign. It felt like I was borrowing someone else's prayer, someone who actually knew what a father's embrace was supposed to feel like. Yes, I believed in God, but I didn't know how to believe that He would want me, that He would stay, that He wouldn't abandon me when I messed up. Then one Sunday I heard a pastor say something that broke through the silence in my soul. You don't come to God cleaned up. You come as a child, loved, messy, and wanted. I wept, right there in my seat, because for the first time I realized I wasn't praying to a mirror of the man who left me. I was praying to the one who had never left, the Father who had been watching over me my entire life, waiting, patient, unchanging. The Son of God became a man to enable men to become sons of God. C.S. Lewis. That truth didn't just comfort me, it healed me. I wasn't just forgiven, I was adopted. I wasn't just part of a religion, I was part of a family. And when Jesus added the words in heaven, He wasn't pointing to a place far away or reminding us that God is somewhere we can't reach. He was showing us that our Father isn't bound by this broken world. He is above every storm, untouched by the chaos, seated in perfect peace, and yet intimately involved in every detail of our lives. In heaven doesn't mean distant, it means divine, it means powerful. It means we are loved by the King who holds the universe, yet still chooses to call us sons and daughters. I know many of you watching this have recited the Lord's Prayer since you were kids. Maybe you said it before bed, or at Sunday school, or whispered it in a hospital room. But today, something changes. Because today you're not just repeating words, you're coming home to the Father who never left you, to the God who never once turned away, to the place where love was always waiting. You are seen. You are wanted. You are not defined by who walked away, but by the one who stayed. So when you whisper, Our Father in heaven, let it become more than a phrase. Let it become your identity. You are not an orphan. You are not forgotten. You are a child of the King, and heaven is not just a far-off hope. It's home, and your Father is waiting to welcome you there, arms wide open. Lead us not into temptation. When I was losing the battle, inside my mind I didn't fall all at once. Temptation rarely kicks the door down. It knocks, quietly, persistently, until you start leaving it unlocked. It began with small compromises. A few late-night scrolls I told myself were harmless. A second glance in public I justified as just being human. A creeping anxiety I tried to silence with worship songs, but never actually surrendered to God. On the outside I looked fine. I was still attending church, lifting my hands during worship, even leading small group. But on the inside I was in a war, and I was losing. What I didn't realize then is what so many Christians today silently wrestle with. Temptation isn't just about lust or sin. It's a battle for your mind, your peace, your integrity, and ultimately your identity. One night, exhausted from pretending, I sat in the dark and whispered a line I had said 1,000 times growing up. But this time it wasn't ritual, it was surrender. Lead me not into temptation. And for the first time I saw clearly. I wasn't falling because I was weak. I was falling because I was fighting alone. I had believed the lie that willpower was enough, that I could walk to the edge and not fall over. But Jesus' words to Peter rang in my heart like a holy alarm bell. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you. Luke 22:31-32. Peter didn't pray. He trusted himself, his loyalty, his strength, his self-image. And he fell. That was me. But then I remembered Joseph in Genesis 39. When temptation came knocking, he didn't rationalize. He didn't flirt with it. He ran. Joseph didn't wait until he was at the edge. He built distance from the moment the door cracked open. So I made a decision that night. I stopped asking God to rescue me after the fall. I started praying for him to redirect my steps before I even got close. I removed the triggers, deleted the apps, blocked the numbers, rearranged my habits, not from guilt, but out of a holy desperation to breathe again. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is." And he was right. Temptation isn't a game, it's a battle. But here's the hope. You're not meant to fight it alone. Jesus didn't just teach us to resist sin. He taught us to pray before we're even tempted. Because prayer is preparation. It's armor. It's God's divine GPS, rerouting you away from what you can't handle alone. And the truth is, sometimes what looks like failure is really a call to awaken. I wasn't a hypocrite. I was human. And what God wanted wasn't my perfection. He wanted my honesty, my willingness to say, "Lord, I'm not as strong as I think I am, but you are." And in that weakness, he became my strength. So if you're watching this and feel like you're losing the battle, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, please hear me. You don't have to wait until you're falling to cry out. You can pray now. You don't have to carry the shame any longer. You don't have to white-knuckle your way through this war. The Lord's Prayer is not a lullaby, it's a battle cry. Lead us not into temptation isn't just a line in a liturgy, it's a cry for direction, a plea for protection, a surrender of pride before the storm begins. And when you pray it with your whole heart, the atmosphere shifts. Chains begin to weaken, thoughts get clearer, your soul starts to breathe again. So, dear friend, if your mind feels heavy and your heart feels tired, don't wait until you've crossed the line. Draw it now. Pray now. Because the battle is real, but the one who leads you is stronger than anything you'll face, and he's already waiting to lead you out. Hallowed be your name. When I realized I was just saying it, I used to say it without thinking. Every night before bed, every Sunday, during worship. Hallowed be your name. It sounded beautiful, sacred, felt safe. But one day, while sitting in the back of a church I hadn't stepped foot in for months, I felt it hit differently. The worship leader read the Lord's Prayer slowly, and when he got to "Hallowed be your name," he paused and then asked, "Are you living like his name is holy, or are you just repeating it?" The question pierced me, because the truth was I wasn't living like God's name was set apart. I honored him with my mouth, but my decisions told a different story. That night I went home and opened my Bible, not to check a box, but to search my heart. And in Matthew 15:8, I read these words, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." It was like a mirror. I saw it clearly. I was using God's name, but not hallowing it, not living in awe, not treating it as sacred in how I talked, how I dated, how I worked, or how I spent my free time. And I realized hallowing his name isn't just about not swearing, it's about living different. We do not really see the name of God as sacred until we live like it. C.S. Lewis. From that day forward, I stopped praying "Hallowed be your name" like a line from a script and started praying it like a vow. Let your name be set apart in my words, in my habits, in how I treat people, in how I carry myself when no one's watching. That's when reverence became real. That's when his name became more than holy. It became personal. Deliver us from evil. At the day I finally asked for help. There was a season in my life when I stopped sleeping with the lights off. I'm not talking about childhood fears. I'm talking about full-grown, grown-up, wake up in a cold sweat fear. It wasn't just stress. It wasn't just anxiety. It felt like something darker had made itself at home, in my thoughts, in my spirit, in my space. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe I was just tired, overwhelmed, imagining things. But deep down, I knew there was something real I couldn't fight on my own. And that's when I came back to a line in the Lord's Prayer I'd never really paid attention to. Deliver us from evil. I didn't just whisper it, I cried it, I clung to it, and something shifted. Not because I had the right words, not because I became suddenly strong, but because I finally admitted I couldn't fix it myself. Enemy-occupied territory, that is what this world is. C.S. Lewis. The darkness didn't leave instantly, but something broke that night. The fear began to lift. The heavy air started to feel breathable again. And I began to see what I had missed all along. This part of the prayer isn't passive. It's a battle cry, a surrender, a signal to heaven that I was ready to stop pretending and start calling for backup. Now I pray this line every morning, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. I pray it for protection, for discernment, for my family, for my mind, because evil doesn't take a day off, but neither does God. For yours is the kingdom. When I finally let go of control, I used to end every prayer with "Amen" and still feel like nothing had changed. I would pour out my heart, ask God for help, cry about my fears, but deep down I was still holding on to control until the day I hit rock bottom. It was the phone call I never wanted to get, the news that shattered every plan I had. My heart felt like it couldn't hold the weight. My mind couldn't fix it. My hands couldn't change it. And for the first time, I had no prayer left, just silence. That's when I opened my Bible and saw it again. For yours is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. And I whispered through tears, God, I give it all back to you. It wasn't surrender out of defeat, it was surrender out of revelation. That this story was never mine to control in the first place. There are two kinds of people, those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, all right then, have it your way. C.S. Lewis. That day, I chose to stop building my own kingdom, to stop trying to prove my strength, to stop acting like the outcome depended on me, and that's when peace rushed in like a river. because His is the kingdom, His is the power, His is the glory, not mine. Now every time I end the Lord's Prayer, I say those final words with fire in my spirit. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Because no matter what this world takes from me, no matter how the battle rages, He still reigns, and that changes everything. A few years ago I thought I had the Lord's Prayer down. I could say it in my sleep. I recited it before meals, during church, at hospital bedsides. It was beautiful, but it was distant, familiar, yet powerless. Until one night, in the middle of a personal storm, I whispered it again, but this time not out of routine. Our Father in heaven. And suddenly it hit me. Not like a line I memorized, but like a door opening. I wasn't reciting a prayer. I was remembering who I belonged to. That night, I didn't just say the Lord's Prayer. I started living it. I began to see each line not as a sentence, but as a lifestyle invitation. Hallowed be your name. Do my actions reflect reverence? Your kingdom come? Am I surrendering my agenda? Give us this day, and am I trusting Him with today, not just tomorrow? Forgive, and am I holding on to bitterness or walking in grace? We must lay before Him what is in us, not what ought to be in us. C.S. Lewis. Friend, this prayer is not just something to quote. It's something to embody. So let me ask you the same question that changed me. Are you reading the Lord's Prayer, or are you living it? Start small. Pick one line each morning. Let it shape your decisions, your attitude, your response to conflict, your sense of identity. Because when you live this prayer, you won't just feel closer to God, you'll see Him transforming everything around you. This isn't about performance. It's about presence, about relationship, about remembering every single day that you are praying to the Father who sees, who hears, and who still moves. So don't just repeat the Lord's Prayer. Let it become your life.